Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Mr. Anthony Franco. How are you on this fine morning in Denver, Colorado?
I'm doing good. How are you doing? It's good to see you.
It was a bad night in Denver sports last night. Both the Nuggets and the Avalanche lost in the playoffs. However, my team, the Colorado Rockies, did not lose. They also did not play. Did you know what if prospects actually look forward to your sales conversation instead of dreading them, Anthony? I mean, I know how many people dread conversations with us. And so what if people actually looked forward to those conversations? I wouldn't know what that would be like. In 1885, John Patterson, founder of National Cash Register, NCR, faced a desperate situation. His revolutionary cash registers weren't selling despite obvious benefit to store owners. Rather than pushing harder with traditional sales tactics, Patterson made a radical shift. He created the Primer, an educational booklet that taught store owners how to detect theft and manage money before ever mentioning his product. This educational approach transformed suspicious prospects into eager customers who reached out to NCR first. Patterson's company dominated the market for decades because he understood that teaching builds more trust than selling. Today on How to Founder, we're talking about developing a lead generation flywheel. I am Chris Franks. With me today is the well-lit and, looking quite spry, Mr. Anthony Franco. And we have an incredible guest, one that has a personal tie to National Cash Register. I will let him tell that story. But 6 weeks of Craig Andrews' life vanished in a drug-induced coma. While doctors predicted death, his wife's words breathed life into him. This experience transformed his understanding of trust and communication, leading him to develop the first-time offer approach that creates buying environments where prospects pursue you rather the other way around. It sounds like what I wanted to have in my dating life, Craig. It just never happened. I tried to have people that was a long time ago. Craig, welcome. Thank you for being here. Sorry for all the bad dad jokes this morning. Tell us a story about National Cash Register, because I think it's a pretty good story. A good way to start.
Well, you mentioned that I was in a coma. So that started August 22nd, 2021. They called my wife in the middle of the night. They heard me scream in the background, no ventilator, no ventilator. And the docs told my wife, hey, we want to put him on the ventilator. And she said, well, he clearly doesn't want to. I hear him yelling in the background. And they're like, and they laughed at her and they said, if you don't put him on the ventilator, he's going to be dead in 24 hours. And she said, well, how many people have you had survive the ventilator? And they said, none. If you remember back to 2021, you got COVID, you went on the ventilator, you're a dead man. And so, kind of given two bad choices, she made one, and that was to put me on the ventilator. And obviously a big shock, realizing that, very, very soon she was likely to be a widow. And my brother and his wife drove from Maryland to Texas overnight to sit with her immediately. And her two sons came in at different times. But when Labor Day rolled around, 2021, she told my brother and his wife and her oldest son, she said, you guys should just go home, come back for the funeral. I need to figure out what life looks like. And so she went back to work. At the time, she was working for National Cash Register. And they said, you know what, Karen, what we want you to do is we want you to work half-time. We're going to pay you full-time. Go take care of your husband. And from Labor Day all the way through the end of the year, they paid her full-time while she only worked half-time. And I just remain amazed that just was such an amazing gesture they made to both of us.
That is a really neat story, and it's fun that we use national cash registers are open there as well. So we're not going to be talking about cash registers today. We're talking kind of about how we can get prospects in the wide world to come to us. How do we start to create this lead?
No, we're
generation?
literally talking about cash registers.
How do we make the metaphorical or literal cash register ring in this particular case? And so, Craig, just get us started here. What should I be thinking about? Why is this important? As an early stage founder, I might not even have a great product market fit yet. Why do I need to start thinking about this even as I'm getting my product off the ground?
You know, at the end of the day, one of my favorite sayings is customer needs will be met, hopefully by you. And, and so the back to NCR National Cash Register, they're having a hard time right now. My wife worked in their POS solutions, and she started telling me about a weird startup out of Boston. And she's like, yeah, but their tech is no good. And I told her, I said, don't count on that not changing. And the startup was somebody called Toast. And if you go out to a restaurant now.
I know Toast.
Yeah, they're saying probably 60% market penetration at this point.
Yeah. And the reason, I mean, NCR was the behemoth in that space. And some scrappy little startup out of Boston just knocked them off their perch. And the reason was they started by meeting customer demands, and I never knew that story about the guide that NCR put out that ended up selling them cash registers. That's the same thing. That was their lead generation, where they started on what are the pains that my customers are having? Why don't I focus on fixing those pains? And that led them to put out that guide. I never knew that. That's such a cool story.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's good. The fact it's interesting that your personal ties to the company as well. So, talk me through kind of the counterpoint, Anthony. Like, how do we get this wrong as early stage founders? Like, oftentimes we have this kind of concept of build it and they'll come, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that's how many times have we said that as the common founder mistake is you build it, you spend all this time on product and spend no time figuring out how you're going to sell it, or better yet, and this is what why I'm looking forward to talking to Craig is, as you're building a product, you should also be building an audience. Equally as important. And so I think our biggest mistake is focusing so heavy. At least mine. I'll talk about myself. I don't want to talk about it for all founders, but I'm so focused on product, and I'm like, I'll get the audience once the product's beautiful. And that's really not how it works.
It turns out that's kind of, there's a long line of business startup failures that follow that same path. You'd think we'd learn that by now, Anthony. So Craig, talk me through the counterpoint here. So if we typically get this wrong, early stage founders, we just focus on product and making it perfect. And there's a huge narrative out there about how product first, surprise and delight customers, et cetera. What should we be doing even as we're just coming up with ideas for our startup? How do we get this proverbial flywheel built, even if it's not moving yet?
It always starts with the customer's pains. Always starts with the customer's pains. Sometimes we come up with this idea that we get enamored with, and we think we convince ourselves, hey, if I just get this out there, the world is going to love it and it's going to transform everything. And for a startup, it's a fatal flaw. For someone like Apple, they call it the Vision Pro. Vision Pro was technology in search of a pain, and they never found it. Right. Apple can afford to dump $1 billion or however much they spend on that product and still stay in business. Most of us can't. And so it always begins with the pain. And let me tie into Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs was launching a new product, the first question he made the entire team answer is, what's the problem we're solving? It always has to begin with a problem we're solving. And I love your national cash register example. The problem was, what would you say the guy was about? It was about, theft and losing money.
Yeah, he was the reason why National Cash Register won was because the people were stealing. And cash register literally locked up the cash where their employees couldn't go, oh, thank you very much.
I mean, that's bizarre, but that's such a great example. You picture somebody coming up with this little gadget, and you want to go in and talk about the gadget, about how it has little buttons, and you push them, the little door slings out, and it makes a nice ding, which makes you excited. But it was really about stopping people from stealing cash. It started with the pain. And
wait, why am I not making any money? These sales seem to be going pretty good, but there's nothing left in the proverbial, cash box at the end of the day. It's strange how that works.
And just for clarity, that I've made that mistake so many times that I'm like a jittery, all hopped up on caffeine or something, in fear that I'm missing the customer pains, because it's so easy to get enamored by our solution, by our technology, by our service, whatever it is we're doing, that we lose sight of the customer's pain. And as soon as you lose sight of the customer's pain, you're screwed. It's just it's a matter of time, because the customer pains will be resolved, hopefully by you.
See the Apple Newton if you want to find a great case study of Steve Jobs completely screwing it up. That was a good one. All right, so if we start with this concept of pain and we really stay rooted in that as we're building our product, how does that customer pain now relate to us starting to build this audience, starting to think about who we're going to talk to, and even building an early hypothesis of which market I'm trying to serve and which customers and how they're actually going to find me and start to make, compare me against the other solutions in the marketplace?
Yeah, so the good news is it's not that hard to find people that are ready to complain about something. And then, first they wouldn't complain about it, then they want to bond.
Have you talked to my wife, Craig?
That's right. Tell me about this complaining. I'm not familiar with it. Everything's rosy in my life. Nobody complains about anything.
Well, and think about the other thing that happens. And honestly, this was my morning, 6:00 this morning. Text message comes across my phone. Somebody's irate about something. And part of it was they were upset with me, but they were upset with me and others. And so I just called him. I said, hey, what's going on? And he started telling me how upset he was with all these other people. And I said, have you called them? Have you called them to talk to them about that? And he's like, well, no, I'm just here to tell you how upset I am. Well, right there's your audience, right?
Right.
Yeah, our audience has pains too. They want to tell other people about their pains. They want to know that they're not alone. And now I would recommend a more productive way than my 6 a.m. conversation this morning. But that's the thing, is people will bond around challenges they're facing and a hopeful vision out of those.
Anthony, it's rare after 91 episodes that we come up with a completely novel idea, but this is one that I really like, which is look for the people that complain the loudest, and those are your early adopters. I want to get your take on that. I think it's a really smart idea.
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty of places to look for them, right? There's, social media is full of them. So I mean, you talk LinkedIn, X, Reddit, all kinds of places. I'm actually struggling here because it is a great idea. I'm writing it down in my notes right now. Look for the complainers.
Yeah, the complainers. All right. So now let's say that we've identified these folks, Craig. We've identified the loud complainers. We're going to call them Anthony and my spouse in the marketplace. Just people that complain the loudest about things. And so in the market, how do we start talking to them? What do we do to get in front of those people and start getting them interested in what we're trying to sell?
Well, and something you said there right at the end ends up being our biggest barrier. turns out people are a little bit adverse to being sold. And so as soon as you show up looking, even smelling like a salesperson,
commission breath.
People just raise their guard. And so what I would recommend is just say, look, I'd love to understand this. I'd love to understand what you're facing more. Because we're in the, we're trying to come up with ideas how to address problems, but we're afraid that we may be addressing the wrong problem. Would you give me, a half hour of your time, just to ask you some questions? And the hard part there, and this is where it's really easy to go wrong. I'm going to tie in Apple again. I'm going to tie in Coca-Cola. We mess up when we start collecting data from prospects when we're asking opinion questions. Opinion questions and focus groups get us in huge amounts of trouble. And so for those that remember the New Coke of 1984, that was a $30 million failure that Coke made. And they launched New Coke. All of a sudden they started getting hate mail. Now, 1984, the internet wasn't in place. People couldn't go Google, what's the address of Coca-Cola headquarters and how do I send them some hate mail? People actually had to do work to find Coke's address.
Right. Yeah.
They had to write a letter, put a stamp on it, walk it down to the mailbox to send this hate mail to Coke. And Coke surveyed 200,000 people. They did a test group. 200,000 people led Coca-Cola to make the wrong decision with New Coke. It wasn't something that they did in isolation. They were asking the wrong question. Similarly, same year, Apple's 1984 ad, their iconic ad, considered to be possibly the best Super Bowl ad ever, almost didn't run because they put it in front of a focus group. And the focus group flunked it. And when the focus group flunked it, the results went to the board of directors. Apple's board of directors pulled funding and said, we're not going to run it. The only reason that ad ever ran was because Steve Jobs was Steve Jobs. And he was standing there next to Wozniak and he said, hey, Woz, I'll pay for half if you'll pay for half. And Woz is like, yeah, sure. And Jobs looked at the board of directors. He said, guys, this ad's going to run. The question you have to answer now is how you're going to go down in history. Are you going to be remembered as the idiots that didn't see the vision of this ad? That's the only reason that ad ever ran. But that's
also you got to appreciate the cojones on Steve Jobs, because we'll turn to the people that could fire him and be like, yeah, this is what's happening here, folks. Better get on board.
But what happens? Okay, I'm going to get a little bit geeky just for a second. Turns out we have two parts of our brain called System 1, System 2. You may have heard it as the fast brain and the slow brain. The fast brain, System 1, the back of your head makes 95% of your decisions, makes them at lightning speed. Your slow brain is your frontal cortex, makes 5% of your decisions, but it's the only part of the brain that can answer an opinion question. If you ask which of these is best, or if you ask, what do you think about this lady throwing a hammer at the big television screen? The only part of the brain that can answer the question almost certainly was not involved in the decision. And our brain does something weird. When it has gaps, it fills in the gaps with crap. And the person doesn't know that they're lying. Their brain is lying to themselves for the reason they made that choice. So when you're going off and you're talking to customers, avoid opinion questions like the plague. The thing that Steve Jobs learned how to do is understand pains, solve problems, figure out what the problems are in their life. Steve Jobs famously said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And he was right. Now, that wasn't saying that he never went off and got, customer feedback. But it was the feedback he was looking for was, what are the pains that are driving, that they're burdening their life? And once he understood that, he was like, okay, how can we solve those pains? And that's where true innovation comes. That's the land of founders. When we deeply understand people's pains and figure out a way of solving those pains that nobody else has done, like making a cash register to stop theft, all of a sudden, amazing things happen.
Oh, sorry, Craig. Didn't mean to jump on top of you like that. I'm fascinated about this idea: fast brain, slow brain, avoid. I think what you're saying is trigger the fast brain when you're asking questions. And how do you do that? Did I hear you right that it's like, don't ask them their opinion, ask them about their pain? Is that really what you're talking about?
Understand their pain. Ask them to make two choices that both involve loss. When you're trying to rank ideas, don't say, hey, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Have it be, if you could have option A or option B. And option A is imperfect. It means giving up something. And option B is imperfect. It means giving up something. If you had to choose between A or B, which would you choose? So like yesterday, I put this to work yesterday. There was working with a financial advisor that's likely going to be a client here shortly. And he had two market segments he was looking at going after. One was individuals that need financial advice. The other was companies that need their 401k managed. And so I asked him the question. I said, if you could have 100 leads of individuals that may need financial advice or 100 leads of businesses, which list would you choose? You can only have one. And all of a sudden, great clarity came out of that moment. He said, businesses, there's more revenue opportunity. You see how it removed that, if I gave him a smorgasbord, he's like, I want it all. Well, we all want it all.
Right.
And, but also, which is also important when you're developing your product or service, you can't give it all at first. You want to start ranking the things that are most important to people. And so the way you do that is you say, hey, given these two opportunities, you can only choose one. Which one do you choose? All of a sudden you start getting clarity on what's more important. Without them fully understanding, you're tapping into their system one thinking when you do that. And so that's really the key. Let me give you another example. So we had a financial advisor as a client a number of years ago. And at one point, I found out that their chief investment officer used to be a big gambler. He'd spend all of his weekends in Vegas. And as a marketer,
investment officer?
Yeah, not a great idea. Right.
Well, you're going to love what I did with it. I put it on their website. We changed their About Us page to put it on the website. Now, understandably, they were a little bit concerned when I brought up this idea. They thought I'd lost my mind. And they actually told me straight up, Craig, you don't understand our clients. I'm like, I promise I do. They're like, no, you don't. And fortunately, there was a young lady there named Talia who said, Craig, do you have a way of testing it? And I paused and I thought about it. I was like, yes, I do. Now, remember, I know the fallacies in testing. So here's what I did to set up the test. I used a platform that was used for usability testing where you send users to a website and you're testing their ability to complete tasks. The more tasks they complete, the more usable your website is. And they show up knowing that they're being tested on task completion. So I set up a series of tasks. The first task was I had them go to and this wasn't a live site, this was a stage site. I had them go to the About Us page and read this story. I said, stop your cameras, read the story. We're going to ask you questions about this. We made them think they were being tested on retention. The real goal was to make sure that they read everything in there. We wanted to make sure we had one paragraph that had two sentences in both sentences. It said he was a gambler. We wanted to make sure that they read that they didn't miss it. And then they came back and we said, all right, what are the key points that you remember from this? And they would share them. Then we gave them a whole bunch of other tasks to do that were just red herrings. We really didn't care about that. We just wanted them to think that they were there for task completion. Then we came back, and here's where we're tapping into their system one thinking. We asked them as the final question, please list the top strengths and the top weaknesses of this company. Nobody could come up with a weakness. Nobody.
That's an interesting one. So just for points of clarification, Thinking Fast and Slow, Danny Kahneman and Tversky, probably the most important business book ever written. Those are the people that did that. I completely agree, Craig. Unbelievably important business book. And the concept of opportunity cost, which is one that a lot of people get wrong, but really Warren Buffett was the one who talks most about opportunity cost, about, hey, when making a decision, think through what you're going to lose, and that usually can help clarify it. All right, so let's move on to tactics here, Craig. So what do we do? We've got these ideas. We've got some ideas. We don't want to talk about solving problems. We don't want to get too far down the weeds. We want to just be really kind of emotionally driven in these environments. How do we turn that into a lead generation machine?
Well, I mean, the example you gave with NCR was a great one. They put out a piece of content that helped people solve problems. You ever hear of the Michelin Guide?
Yes. Terrific one, yeah.
Michelin Guide, that's a 125-year-old lead generation tactic. The Michelin wanted to sell more tires, and in 1900, the people who made the choices for tires were chauffeurs, because the only people that owned cars were rich people. So they made a guide that deliberately took the owners of cars out to the French countryside where they would wear down their tires, and they rated restaurants and inns. That was their lead generation. So, even today, content marketing still works for generating leads. Make sure your content focuses on solving problems. I will say this, it's gotten harder, especially in the advent of ChatGPT. What was working for lead generation content 5 years ago is not working today, because guess what? People are figuring out, I can just go into chat and say, hey, answer this for me. I don't have to give you my stinking email, because I know you're going to hunt me down like any salesperson does. And so the quality of content has to be a lot better to solve leads, to generate leads. And again, you don't want to miss this fact that you have to be focused on solving problems. Most people, I mean, there's a percentage of the population. I'm one of those. I just like gathering information because I find it fascinating. But the vast majority of the population isn't that way. They have no need to fill out your lead gen form just so they can learn something that they could easily learn somewhere else. It has to solve a problem in their life.
Anthony, I think one of the pieces that we probably hear more frequently is, why would I give away my secret sauce? Like, why would I put this educational piece out there that's going to tell people what I'm going to be doing in my product or service? How would you answer that, Anthony?
Yeah, that's coming from somebody that hasn't really gone to market yet. Like we hear that a lot, right? So I'm trying to land more customers, and you tell them, well, you got to give away the secret sauce. And they're like, well, but then why are they going to hire me? It's because they don't want to do it. They just want to know that you can do it. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I mean, let me give an example. So this is a book I published about a year and a half ago called Make Sales Magical. Not a sales book, it's a marketing book, because when the marketing's done right, the sales are magical. But this book is solely devoted to teaching how to make something called a first-time offer. That's a low-ticket front-end offer that leads to your high-ticket core offer. I can't tell you the number of people that have come to me and read my book and said, hey, Craig, I put together this offer. What do you think? And I look at it.
It's not working quite like I want to. Could you help me?
Right. Yeah. And there's an element of expertise, right? And I use the example of, I do some woodworking. I have very, very nice Japanese chisels. Well, the differentiator isn't the chisels. It's the hand that holds the chisel. And the hand that holds the chisel is where the master craftsmanship comes into place. So if you're doing whatever it is, you're probably better at it than anybody else in the world. And what seems easy to you is hard to others. And so put it out there. I mean, very, very low risk, because very few people are going to be able to copy what you do naturally.
I like it. All right. So just tactically, we start by creating content. We'll give away those things. It might have taken us a lifetime to learn. We have to do it freely, Anthony. We have to be able to give away our secret sauce. But then, Craig, mechanically, we put it offer on our website for free or low cost. Is that what you're saying? And then what do we do to follow that up?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, the progress I use, and just for clarity, I work exclusively with people that have high ticket services, and I have a high ticket service. So there are things I give away for free. The goal of those is to create a conversation where I sell them something that's stupidly cheap. We call it a first time offer, that solves a lot of problems, packs a lot of value. And in the process of doing that, when it's structured right, they start realizing I have problems I didn't realize I had. And that's one of the biggest problems. As a founder, we know the problems our clients have, but the problem is they don't know they have them. And you won't get paid for value that people don't understand. And so if you want people to understand the true value you bring, get their feet wet, get them in a more intimate setting where they start experiencing, oh, wow, this is harder than I thought. Oh, the key is not the Japanese chisel. The key is the technique. The chisel just works better in the right hand. And I've now discovered the right hand. Hey, can you help me solve this problem for me? Boom.
I like it. Also, the analogy to me always comes up with golf clubs. You see bad golfers that pay a lot of money
With
for the
beautiful
golf clubs.
golf clubs. Yeah, that's great.
Turns out it's not the golf clubs. It's the person swinging the golf clubs. That's way more important. Maybe spend a little less money on new golf clubs and maybe take some lessons. All right, Craig, are you ready for the speed round?
Let's do it.
I hope the answer is yes. Hang on. All right, Craig, is it better to create scarcity or abundance in your initial offering? Great question.
Ooh. Oh, now I'm a marketer, so I'm tough to pin down. I'm going to say you always want to create an abundance of value, but scarcity is the fuel that moves things forward.
Ooh, I like it. Should you lead with your credentials or your prospects' problems?
That's easier. Nobody cares about you. We live in an egocentric world. Shut up about you. Look about them.
Cares. Nobody cares, Anthony. Nobody cares about us. Is a smaller qualified lead list better than a larger unqualified lead list?
Yeah. People talk about web traffic. They want more traffic. I bet you most people, if they got 100 visitors a month and every one of those 100 visitors became clients, they'd be tickled pink.
Does revealing your pricing early help or hurt the conversation?
That's a little more complicated, but as soon as they start asking the question, you should reveal it. And if you don't give guidance on your website, they're going to usually assume, statistically, they're going to assume that you're more expensive than you really are.
I like it. Should your lead magnet give away your best stuff, or should you save it for paying clients? We just answered this, but I'd like to get it on the record.
Yeah, no, reveal your secret sauce. People can't copy it as easily as you think they can.
Chris, I have a follow-up, actually. Please. So I want you to talk a little bit about this lead with your credentials versus the prospect's problem. There is this issue of establishing authority, though. So is your audience, is your customer going to listen to you if they don't believe you're an authority? And how do you strike that balance between, okay, this person's worth listening to solve my problem, or like, how do you strike that balance?
Right. So let me deal with the easy one first. If you're on stage, you have authority. Somebody invited you either on their stage or you own the stage that you're on. Don't stand on stage and say, here's why I'm on stage. You already have built-in authority. So shut up about that. Whenever you're on a stage, whether you're on a podcast or a physical stage or whatever, assume the authority that's already there because you're on the stage. Don't repeat it. Now, when you're not on stage, we've all met these people at parties. They're like, hi, I'm Craig. Let me tell you. I mean, it's like Troy McClure from The Simpsons.
What a great reference. I love it.
Hi, I'm Troy McClure. Yeah. You may know me from such great film. I mean, that's how we sound. We turned it into a joke on The Simpsons. As soon as something ends up in a Weird Al Yankovic song or in a Simpsons episode, you should cut it from your business.
That's a pretty Good point. I like it. So, Anthony, really good conversation. What did you learn from today's episode?
The things that I wrote down here, I'll try to go through them quick. I wrote down audience is at least as important as the product. Start with the audience pain, audience/customer, right? Create content to help them solve it without you. So give them the content to help solving it themselves. I wrote down, look for people that complain the loudest. I think it's an amazing tactic.
Yeah,
I wrote down, ask the right questions when you're talking to them. Trigger that fast brain when doing customer research. Avoid opinion questions. Ask 2 questions that incorporate loss. And then I have 2 tactics. You can give away the secret sauce if they need you to implement, and make a low ticket offer that drives customers to a high ticket offer. Most importantly, you need to buy Craig's book. Sorry, that was a plug for Craig.
I like it. Deep dive recommendations. Good segue. Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. They Ask, You Answer by Marcus Sheridan. One of my favorite books, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And of course, Craig, your books. Where can we find your books? Where can we find more information about you? And I believe you have an offer as well.
I do. So, Make Sales Magical is available on Amazon. It is not a book about sales. It's a book about marketing, because when the marketing is done right, the sales are magical. And if you want to read a thriller where you know the outcome, the hero wins in the end, Hope That Won't Die is a book that my wife and I co-authored about my near early departure from this world, and also available on Amazon. And for those that are listening, we haven't talked much about these first-time offers other than concept. I have 2 gifts. So guess what? Getting these right is wrong, or it's hard. It's easy to make a lot of mistakes. I've made them. I've stepped on the rake many times. So I have a guide about how to avoid some of the mistakes that I made. And I also have 23 days access to a course that people can sign up and get to. The reason we do 23 days access is we study people. And we know that if I give you unlimited access to the course, you will sign up and never take the course. We track it in the analytics, and doggone, when people have 23 days access, they show up, they do the course, their lives are changed. And that's our goal. So
that's what I'm going to take away from this. I'm not going to remember anything else except for 23 days. Like any offer I now have, it's going to be exactly 23 days.
I'd be impressed if you remember the 23 days, Chris.
That's a good point. I'm probably won't even remember my name at the end of this. Craig, appreciate the time. Really insightful conversation. Anthony, what do we have coming up?
We have Getting Good at Digital Marketing with Jason Bernard. Looking forward to that conversation. We've tried to have that conversation multiple times, and they always kind of are swing and a miss. So we'll see how this one goes. Chris knows what I'm talking about. Everybody that's watching, thank you so much. Craig, thank you for actually, it's a great conversation. Lots of great takeaways. If you guys like this episode, go to howtofounder.com and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on one of those channels. And for Chris's sanity, please leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts. He is compensated by hitting a 4.9, and we're at 4.7. So Chris right now is struggling to feed his family. Because you guys aren't leaving us reviews.
I don't think Craig talked about guilt. I don't think guilt was one of the primary drivers that Craig talked about. I like it. Guys. It's a test, Craig. It's all a test. We'll see.
It's a test. All right. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.